purpose of government is to secure the rights that come to us from God. To secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. It's a famous quote from Jefferson, in which he says, "I swear eternal enmity against every form of tyranny over the mind of man." And it's interesting in a number of respects, because that word tyranny is the focus. Now, what is tyranny? Well, tyranny, to put not too fine a point on it, is lawless government. It is government that acknowledges no law, but the arbitrary whim or will of the sovereign, whoever that may be. Tyranny was something that had to do with the way that laws were made. And they understood that the tyrannical results, the brutal results, the crushing out of life, the stealing of land, the destruction of on a large scale, that was something that actually began inside. And that's the other part of Jefferson's famous quote, isn't it? Over the mind, he says. Why? Because he understands tyranny doesn't begin out here. It begins in here. Because tyranny has first to begin in the breakdown of character. It has then to begin in the breakdown of understanding, as people begin to see the lesser manifestations of that breakdown of character and don't react. That means every time I see it, I will resist it. I will be the enemy of tyranny over the mind, because if you can shackle the mind, then you will easily shackle the people themselves. Barack Obama was going around bowing to people. Remember this? He was bowing to the Japanese emperor and bowing to the Saudi king and so forth. And it brought to my mind, and I looked it up and verified it, the fact that when the U.S. Olympic team participated in the Olympics that took place in Belgium, where they had a king at the time, our team was the only team that did not stand before the royal box and go into a deep bow. Why? Because Americans at that time still believed that Americans did not bow before any human power. They bowed to God. I think it's important to remember the way in which our faith informed the courage and spirit with which Americans approached that battle. Didn't have to argue in those days about whether chaplains were going to be kept with the units or whether there was a role for prayer, because when you're in the midst of real war, you know that there's a role for prayer. And everybody doesn't mind at all, just in case, seeking the prayer and the help from the Lord, because you never know, and even the avowed atheists will sit and listen patiently while you call upon the Lord. They may soon be meeting. At the end of the day, it is the people who are the guardians of the Constitution. It is the people who are the guardians of their liberty. No government, no army, no armed force can substitute for it. The courts have neither force nor will, because the president, the one we call the executive, is in command of all the forces. In other words, the one who can act, the one who can actually do anything is the president. And the will is in the Congress, because they're the elected legislative body that represents the sovereign's will. For the sovereign is not the president, it's not the court, and it's not the Constitution, contrary to what some people want us to believe. The sovereign power is vested in the people of the United States, who speak the words of the Constitution. And it is the sovereign who speaks the words that organize the government. It is the sovereign that chooses the ministers of the government, as we choose the president and the legislators. How are the people who are the guardians of the Constitution supposed to do their job? Well, in the first instance, they're supposed to do that job by taking account of the breaches of that supreme law in such a way that they form what the court does not have. See, as Hamilton rightly pointed out, doesn't have the force because that's in the hands of the executive, and doesn't have the political will because that ultimately is in the hands of the people, who are then supposed to shape the composition of the legislature to reflect that. Congress has been asking questions, and the executive has been refusing to provide answers. Well, what's the only process where there is no basis in executive prerogative for refusing to answer the questions of the legislature? See, because the executive does have the ability to say, no, can't answer that question because that's executive privilege. If I answer that question, it's going to interfere with an ongoing effort that we're making. That is required, and I can't tell you that. It's especially potent when they do it on national security grounds, isn't it? And so Benghazi would fall right in that category. So the president can extend the cloak of his executive privilege over anybody and tell the Congress, no, not going to let them talk to you. Or we'll stand by while they don't talk to you. What can the Congress do? Well, the ultimate sanction is to impeach them. Impeachment means, in the first instance, not remove, but accuse. Indict. Say, you are doing something wrong. And what do they then have to do? They then have to come before the Congress in order to tell them what they're doing. And the Constitution says explicitly that the president has no power to pardon folks, no power to protect them, which he has otherwise in full range, when impeachment is involved.